I'm absolutely thrilled to have Danuta on the podcast today to share her insights and tips on girls with autism spectrum. Danuta is a clinical psychologist and the author of I Am Aspie Girl. She is the director of Uniquely Used Psychology, a private clinic for females with autism spectrum. Welcome, Danuta.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm thrilled. I know how busy you are and young family, and squeezing us in. I really, really appreciate it. So I absolutely love your book, I'm Aspie Girl, and I know so many of my listeners do too. And when I asked on my Facebook group what was their favourite book for sharing diagnosis, everybody said your book. It was just fantastic, especially as an Australian author and I have parents all over the world. It was just lovely to see. So can you share, why did you write the book? Give us a bit of insight.
Okay. Well, do you know that I wrote the book not because I was an aspiring author, but rather I needed a resource. So I would do my diagnostic assessments, and when it came to the feedback session and I needed to recommend a book for the little girls to read about themselves, there wasn't one around that really accurately described what their presentation was. So there was also all these awesome books for general ASD or boys, which was still great, but it just didn't hone in on the female presentation. So I would always sort of read that book and then explain, oh, but for you it's a little bit different because this is how you present or this is what you do. So then I just thought, oh, you know what, I'll just have to write one. And so it came about.
I love it. And I mean, there's so much more you could have written in the book, but you've really picked how did you pick which characteristics you ended up putting in the book?
Well, I was a little bit time poor. I wrote it when I was pregnant with my first child. Was I pregnant? Or I think it was actually after I'd given birth. So I had some time, but I didn't have a lot of time, obviously. So I just tried to hone in on what the elements were in the girls, and I wanted to keep it basic because I didn't want to overwhelm the girls. So I just thought I'll just pick the things that maybe they can see and they notice the most.
Yeah, which I think is why it resonates with parents and the girls, because it's the stuff they've already sort of conscious or subconsciously aware of about themselves. So it's the questions they sort of ask or don't know how to ask, because I often think with diagnosis, I mean, it's a bit like sex education. Kids don't know what to ask. So we have to guide them what they need to know. And what I feel with I'm Aspie Girl, you're guiding them to understand themselves, or when I'm reading it with a class, to understand other girls that they know. So that's what I love about it, the practical, and it just makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, love it. And can you give examples how you use the book or would recommend people use the book?
Yeah. So I would, I guess and the thing is, I use it after a diagnostic assessment. So after explaining the diagnosis to the Aspie girl, I might take the book out and show her the book. So we might read through, we might stop and ask the purple questions that are written on each page to explore how it is specifically presenting for that particular person. Because as we know, every child on the spectrum is unique and they might not experience those particular difficulties. So I like to sort of check in and say, oh, is that what it's like for you, or is it a little bit different? And then we explore what their specific sensory sensitivities, for example, might be. And then I suppose, I use the book with girls who have had their diagnosis for a while. They might want to go back to understand how to explain it to their friends, for example. So then we pick certain parts from the book to focus on, because it can be very hard for them to explain their diagnosis to others in, peer-specific language.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, isn't it? Because that's all they know often. So they don't understand for the other girls, this is different for them. So yeah. What age do you find, I think recommending ages is tricky, but what age do you find the girls want to share with their friends?
Oh, look, it depends on the level of insight in the girl. and also their level of acceptance and how far in, how old they were when they were diagnosed and what's going on for them. So there's a lot of different factors. So, I mean, some girls, when they find out about their differences, are so ecstatic. They just want to shout it out to the world and share it to everybody. And that's when we sort of say, well, hang on, let's be a little bit discerning. You know, not everyone's going to use the information to be kind, and not everyone naturally is like that. And so it's helping the girls understand when it's a good idea to talk about it. But often, I guess, I think probably more late primary is probably roughly a good time that's when the girls really want to share it. When they're getting into adolescence, probably a little bit older, the sort of 13-year-old age is a bit tricky. There's a lot of challenges in accepting the diagnosis at that age.
I agree. In both the boys and the girls is my experience. Secondary is the hardest because for me, and I'm not a psychologist, I'm just a teacher and who observe peer relationships. And I just find with secondary, all teenagers want to fit in and naturally moving away from their parents as their guides. And that diagnosis, that later diagnosis is so hard to navigate because of the complexity of puberty and peer relationships. So for me, the younger we can get that information and that positive identity built, the going into high school with that ready is so much easier than a later diagnosis and trying to navigate the complexity of teenage anyway, which we all remember. And also, and I'm sure you see this as a psychologist, in a primary school they often have one teacher and one peer group for every lesson, so they get to know each other and their differences, whereas in high school they might swap who's in their lesson every lesson and swap teachers. So it's a confusing time for many of my Aspies. It's exhausting socially, let alone adding this layer of understanding the diagnosis. Is that your experience? I mean, I'm
I agree. And I think that, when it comes to a book like this, it's probably works best when they're in their sort of the older primary years. I think when they're adolescents, a group around the diagnosis, which we have at UniQ, works really well because it's more about sharing their experiences and differences and similarities, and that's when it works better for that age.
I agree. That's exactly my experience, that it's, they're wanting more the peer interaction than us. So, and that's fantastic you offer that, because I do say to parents with teenagers, I would be getting the psychologist, the person who does the diagnosis, to share the diagnosis and explain it more than you, because it is really hard to know what to say. But I think in the secondary, it's so much better if it's in your context, and then followed up at home. I mean, I really do look at sharing diagnosis a little bit like the birds and the bees. It has to be an ongoing conversation. It's not a one-off sit-down serious moment. It's as things come up and just making it part of your everyday conversation. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that, quite often within the family, we have different family members who had similar experiences growing up, and it can really be great for parents to do a little bit of disclosing and explain to their daughter if they had certain similar differences or difficulties and what worked for them and what they wish they didn't have, etc.
And this is what I mean personally, and with a lot of my teens, where I will guide them to people with a lived experience as mentors, because Facebook now, and there's so many places they can reach out safely to private groups and share in an environment, and often hear those conversations and people's experiences where they can go, oh, that's me. Or, yellow ladybugs often have great stuff that I will show, and I'll make sure I put yellow ladybugs in the notes if anyone doesn't know them. But for me, many of my parents who watch that page go, oh, that's me. I hadn't even realized that was me as a child. And then they can mentor their own child in that understanding. So, because this is why I love what you're doing, because when I started in autism spectrum, the girls were very unheard and very unrecognized. And I mean, you would have seen that change. When do you think we really started to notice the girls in a better way than we used to?
Yeah, well, I suppose when I moved to Brisbane for a few years, and I was fortunate to have worked alongside Tony Atwood and Michelle Garnett and the team at Minds and Hearts. And it was really then that I became aware of it. And that was, gosh, is it really 12 years ago?
I was going to say it's close to 15 years ago. And I don't stalk you. I don't stalk you, Danuta, but I'm just thinking, I reckon it's 10 or, yeah, because I think
believe it was that long ago. Yes, a decade ago. Wow.
Yeah, because my autism journey is, like, dare I say, 30 years ago. And I reckon it's about halfway through that we even started to talk about girls. And then we've become more and more aware, which is why it's so fantastic, and why I know I've had families come down from Canberra to see you and places. It's so important that there's a clinic like you have for our girls and women who really just focus on that and provide that understanding and expertise, which is what we need, and it makes a huge difference. So what do you wish people knew about the girls? What are things that you just wish people understood?
Yeah, so I guess many are natural mimics. They can be extroverted and they can be introverted. They might smile at school, give eye contact and nod, perform, look like they're really into it, and then they get home and they might fall in a heap or fall asleep for the rest of the afternoon. So I guess, they are chameleons, not all of them, but many are chameleons. So that amount of performance requires an enormous amount of energy. So I think what we do need to remember is that they might not be on like that all the time. So there comes a point where, the things will probably suffer at home. So I think that it's important to be aware of that and to give them opportunities to have downtime at home and switch off. And also, I guess it's important to know that many girls with ASD become very insightful and articulate women with ASD. So when you have the girl in front of you, she may not be able to articulate at that point what's going on for her emotionally. But fast forward 20 years, she'll be able to reflect on what it was like as a teenager. So I find that fascinating because I often can't get that information directly from the girls, but it's really great to see that it does, you can get it back when they're older, you can find out about it.
I think this very long memories is really, really important, because I've taught a number of girls who in the moment can't tell me what happened, or they might have even had a relief teacher, and they see that relief teacher 3 years later and will tell me something that happened in that lesson. Yet at the time, all I got reported back from the relief teacher was, she, had a shutdown, but I didn't have any more information. Yet 3 years later, child sees that same adult and can actually tell me what happened. It was a noise or a something social that happened, or an activity that overwhelmed them, but at the time they couldn't verbalize it, or even the next day when I came back into the classroom. Yet 3 years later, I don't know if they've processed it in that time.
Yes.
Or I would love to know, but I find that so interesting. And I think for many of my parents, what can be exhausting, because they have such long memories of things. So parents say, we're going to Woolworths, and they're wanting to know which Woolworths, what time, where are we parking, and minute detail, and the parent probably doesn't even remember where they went last time. I don't know. That's my experience.
Yeah, I agree.
And what else about the girls? Chameleons, I think, is the hardest part for teachers, because the children often go home and have huge meltdowns, and we've seen no sign of it at school whatsoever. Yeah. What else do you think?
So I guess I for many years I hear that the teachers are saying that there's no problems, they're fine. I've been looking for signs, because I'm hearing that they're having meltdowns at home. I just can't see it. And that just goes, it's a testament. It shows how clever they are at acting. And but some of them aren't at all mimics, but many are. And I suppose it's really important to know that, because you need to know how to ask the girls when they're in front of you. And some of them will be able to have that insight and will be able to report. So I recently met a lovely girl who, was quite surprised me. She was gifted. And that didn't surprise me. They're often gifted. But what surprised me was the level of insight. So she was able to really say how exhausted she was from socialising.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, I think that's the thing that I wish people understood, that the girls desperately want those friends and relationships, and other children go out at the recess and lunch and have a lovely time, and it's fun and exciting and often the best part of the day. Yet for many of my girls, that playground is where they have to be a chameleon more than ever, and the rules change and the sensory comes in and the exhaustion when they come back to the classroom. So I think you're right, because I've had girls, for example, in lockdown who were doing Lego challenges with their friends online. So that wasn't very confusing, was it? That was like, here's what we're going to do. In the playground, play isn't that structured.
Yeah, exactly right. Yes, because that's one thing we have to keep in mind. For neurotypical girls, it's energizing to go out and play and hang out, and that's where you burn off your steam and then you're ready for learning. So the girls on the spectrum find it exhausting, and it's not at all energizing.
No. So, I mean, I don't know, but for me as a teacher, because there'd be some teachers listening who are like, well, how do I know who these girls are? Like, you're really confusing me. They're a chameleon. But they're the signs I look for. I look for often, well, a lot of the girls I've taught are very possessive of their friends. They're very anxious if their friends are away, or if there's a big change in social friendships, that navigating the social. I look for the parents telling me that the child is having these meltdowns when they go home. And a number of the girls, I would say, just that anxiety perfectionism, like, when I see, they were sort of started the day okay with little mistakes, but by the end of the day, the smallest mistake can set them off. So I think their chameleonness can't stay up all day. So I see a change throughout the day. Is that what you would tell teachers to look for?
Yeah, absolutely. You've really struck the nail on the head with that. The perfectionism is a big one. Afraid of getting things wrong, not asking for help. So many of these girls will just suffer through confusion rather than raise their hand or draw any attention to themselves. And this is where some of the girls are really struggling now with the remote learning, because they're not getting the cues from around them of what's happening, and they might be missing things, but they're too scared to email the teacher or to ask a question. So definitely that. Also, I'd also look at the nature of the social relationships. Often they can be quite superficial. So that looks on the outside like they are managing, and they might be sort of laughing when the other girls are laughing. But, just watching them and seeing whether, how deep are their friendships? Are they actually wanting to see them outside of school? Some of them desperately do, but don't know how to firstly muster up the energy to do so, or have the skills to initiate that. Whereas others just do not want to see their friends outside of school. They've met their purpose, they've fulfilled their purpose, and that's it.
Yeah, schools for school, homes for home. Why? I mean, I had a young boy on the spectrum once say to me, why would I want to invite someone over? They have their own house. It's very logical, very logical. But yeah, the girls I get that. So if I often get asked, by teachers, so if a teacher listening thinks, oh, I know a girl like this, I really need to do something. How do you recommend teachers approach that conversation with parents if the parents haven't mentioned anything?
Yes. I guess often you might notice a sort of an anxiety, perhaps, like this girl seems very contained or almost frozen. I'd want to explore that a little bit more, maybe ask the family how she is in terms of, does she feel stressed easily? I think, I would say talk to the parents. The parents usually will be able to report what's going on at home, and if there's a mismatch between personalities like that, that's quite informative. teachers to definitely invest in building up a relationship with the girl in question, and just really getting to know her, finding out about her interests. Often you sort of see, like, when they talk about their special interests, they sort of like relax, and, you know, out comes, you know, all this great information and passion, and then you see a real sort of change in her demeanour. But really, I think being very discreet with the Aspie girl, and asking her, you know, what she needs from the teacher, or and being willing to offer suggestions, as the girl may not be able to articulate what she needs.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think what you mentioned before too about if the girl's not asking for help, I think that's a big one. Like, I often say to the parents, you know, when she's wanting to everything get just right at home, does she ask you for help? Like, sometimes then I'll get the parents like, oh no, she has these big meltdowns when she makes a mistake, and I'm like, all right, because I don't get the meltdowns at school, but she'll freeze, or, you know, sometimes that's how I explore it. As a teacher, I'm always anxious to say, I think your child has Asperger's. I mean, are you a bit the same? Would you say just go and see a psychologist, or what would you say to teachers they should have? How should they frame that conversation?
Yeah, so I guess perhaps, like, in the schools, the wellbeing department, that's a good start. So usually the psychologist or the counsellors there will form a natural bridge between the teacher and the parent in terms of the psychology, and, you know, they've got a little bit of insight into what's happening, and that might help to open up that pathway of communication.
I agree. That's exactly what I do. But it's always nice for people to hear it from someone else and me always saying the same things on my podcast. And I am always open to asking and trying to understand the best way, because things do change. You know, I've been teaching 30 years now. So sometimes I hear things like, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense. That's changed. So, yeah. So have you got 3 tips that parents or carers could take away to use after listening to this podcast?
Okay, so I suppose for parents, it's very tempting when you pick up your daughter from school to ask her lots of questions. Who did you play with? Who did you talk to? What did you do? All of that. And this can really feel like a bit of an interrogation, and it can be very overwhelming. So quite often parents will say they can tell from their child's face as they're approaching the car what kind of a day their daughter has had. So I think be very, very aware and observant about her face, because it may tell you so much. And perhaps don't bombard her with questions. Ask her if she feels like talking or if she wants some quiet time. And later on, pick your moment, and then you can ask questions. So I think that's a big one. I often hear about that from my family.
That's why a lot of my girls have that meltdown as soon as they get in the car. And without a doubt, the look on the face, for me, the hair, you know, often the ponytails were perfect in the morning, but the afternoon, and the school bag. I mean, even as a teacher, that's what I'm looking like. The school bag being dragged, not on their back, or kicked. You know, I just sort of hair, face, school bag normally tell me a lot about, you know, if I'm at the pickup queue at a school, that's what I'll be watching, mindful of for many of my Aspies, how that looks, and that tells me, you know, whether I'm going to chat to them in the line too while we're waiting for parents and things. So I love that. Absolutely.
Yes.
Don't ask questions.
Yes, good non-verbals, yes. Also, potentially, I think showing an interest in your daughter's special interest.
Absolutely.
Because this gives her so much pleasure and can be a natural way of boosting her self-care and self-soothing skills, and just show a genuine interest in it, to make time, to have quality time, to listen to her talk about it, or to show you what she's up to in that game or that drawing. And remind your daughter about her talents, about how much you love her and appreciate her, and that she's doing a great job at life.
Yeah, I think every age needs that with our girls, and joining them in their special interest, I think, so important. And parents, or if we've got grandparents listening, you don't need to know anything, grandparents, about My Little Pony. She knows a lot. Just listen. She'll she'll tell you everything. Or, no matter how bizarre, I had a little girl that just loved pink, and we just talk pink. It's amazing how many different types of pinks there are in the world, so I don't think you need to rush out and learn anything about them. Let them be the guide. Let them share all their knowledge, and I think that actually builds them up, that they know something and are sharing with you and family members about their interests. And it's such a great thing. And I agree, acknowledging it's their way of calming and soothing, and ensuring that they feel comfortable expressing themselves that way is so important. So I can't thank you enough. This has been jam-packed with information. I've just looked down at the time, and I told you we'd keep it short and sharp, but there's been so much to share. But I have to ask, because everyone asks me, are you going to do I Am Aspie Boy as a book?
The boy. Do you know, I haven't thought of the Aspie Boy one. I think I would probably like to keep it in the format of the girls. I think there are lots of books on the boys that are really helpful. I think, though, in future, potentially I would consider writing, like a sequel, I suppose, of what happens to Lizzie when she is a teenager, to follow her along and see what sort of difficulties and challenges, or perhaps, particular insights she has as a teenage Aspie girl.
I love that. That would be so good. Well, I know you're really busy, but when you have some downtime, I look forward to seeing that. And I know now you've put it out there. It's going to happen, Danuta. I'll hold you to it, because you're right.
All right.
The girls who have had that book, to have the sequel is such a brilliant idea, and would just really support so many of those girls along their journey, and very special. Well, thank you so much. It's just been such a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for everything you do for all of our girls and women, and raising awareness and helping them understand their uniqueness. It's so important. So,
well, thanks so much, Sue, for having me. It was great to chat with you.
It was so lovely. Thank you. What an absolutely jam-packed podcast with lots of tips. I hope whether you're listening as a parent, carer, teacher, you've taken away some great ideas to understanding girls with autism spectrum. I highly recommend Danuta's book, I Am Aspie Girl. It's on my website if you don't know it. Schools, I would love you to have it in your library. It's a fabulous book for all girls to understand themselves and others. I really do believe to embrace difference, to make a difference, we need to educate all students about what is autism spectrum and how they can support their peers when they see girls on the spectrum. Now, Danuta said she's going to write a sequel, but if any of you are after books for girls and adults on the spectrum, I'll link to some lovely books for women with Asperger's too, Asper Girls, and also a beautiful new book by Sienna Castellan, who is a 17-year-old who's just written a fantastic new book on her experience with autism spectrum and ADHD and her sensory, and it's called the Autism Girls Survival Guide, How to Grow Up Awesome and Autistic, and it is just fantastic. So I'll make sure I link to all of those in the show notes, and as always, you can get some fabulous resources on my website to make a difference to the kids you know. I forgot to say, make sure you check your emails this week, because I've done a PDF on how girls differ to boys, because I think this is invaluable to understand, and my posts on social media will be around that, as well as information on books on girls and lots of tips. So make sure you check your emails or check my social media, and I'll send you that PDF with the information on how girls differ to boys and why they are often so hard to get diagnosed. I absolutely love Danuta's insights and understanding on the girls. Also, I have a range of upcoming workshops. There is live virtual where you can join me from anywhere, anytime. And remember, there's a replay that comes with that. So you can learn in your PJs, have a work from home day, whatever works for you.
on August 30th, which is a PD day in Queensland. So most of you should be having that day off for professional learning anyway. And if you have a look on my website, I've got a whole lot of options, like for teacher assistants who have got that day. I've got a whole lot of suggestions for courses, as well as my course, Tony's course, Temple Grandin or PDA. Anyway, I've put a page of like just courses that I recommend, and I've also got a special discount coupon for that for $50 off. So make sure you check that. And I hope you can join me. And I also have some face-to-face in Sutherland, Newcastle, and Rooty Hill in New South Wales. So please join me, register ASAP. We have got limited spaces for those. Also, I'm starting to plan my 2025 calendar. If you would like me to come to your school and do a professional development day, which I'm doing more and more of because it's so hard for schools to release staff now. It's nearly easy to just shut the school for a day and have me in for a PD day. And I love it when we do whole school PDs because we can actually do specific case studies and information. Some schools, I just did one this week where they joined with another school, and that's a really good way to do it too. It can be a couple of schools together. For me, particularly when I'm traveling to different places, I hate it when people miss out. So I'm always like it if a school hosts it and invites other parents, community to come along. So please reach out if you're planning your 2025 calendar, because I think I'm pretty much full for 2024 now. I'm really looking forward. I think I'm going to most states in Australia in term 4. So I look forward to seeing lots of you in your schools for professional development. And if you're looking for some practical PD, I'd love to see you next year. Take care.